When billionaire Gregory Sinclair handed a broken laptop to the maid's daughter, it was meant to be a harmless joke. Something to amuse himself on a quiet afternoon. But what happened next didn't just power on that dusty old machine, it sparked something much deeper. A memory. A connection. And a chance to heal a part of his heart he thought was gone forever. Welcome, friends. If you've ever believed that the smallest gesture could change a life, or that a child's spark can light up even the coldest soul, this story is for you. Where are you watching from today? Drop your city or country in the comments. We love hearing from people around the world who believe in second chances, quiet miracles, and the power of kindness. Now, let me tell you what happened in that kitchen, on a day no one expected to matter, until it did. Emily Carter had never seen ceilings that high. The chandelier above the grand marble foyer sparkled like icicles, and the polished floor reflected her worn sneakers like a mirror. She followed closely behind her mother, Julia, who pushed a cart full of cleaning supplies, careful not to make a sound. This was not the kind of place where little girls made noise. This was the kind of place where everything whispered of money, quiet, old money. It was Saturday morning, and Julia had been called in to clean the Sinclair estate on short notice. The regular staff had the day off, and Gregory Sinclair, the reclusive billionaire who owned the tech empire Cintrix, wasn't expected to be home. So Julia brought her daughter along, hoping Emily could quietly entertain herself while she worked. Emily had promised to be no trouble. While her mother disappeared into the east wing to polish silver and dust furniture, Emily settled into a quiet corner of the massive kitchen. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. Sleek granite countertops, 6-burner stove, chrome fixtures that looked like spaceships, and 2 refrigerators taller than she was. Everything smelled like citrus polish and old secrets. She opened her backpack and pulled out a wrinkled manila folder, worn from being opened and closed too many times. Inside were several pages, black and white photocopies of a Python programming book she had found at the public library. She had asked the librarian if she could borrow the actual book, but it was reference only. So instead, she had photocopied the chapters she didn't understand and read them over and over again like scripture. Emily spread the pages carefully on the kitchen island and began reading, her lips moving silently as she worked through a loop structure. She didn't have a computer at home, just her imagination. She wrote code in her head and debugged it in her dreams. Her pencil moved across the margin as she scribbled notes, not realizing how much time was passing. Gregory Sinclair had returned to the house unexpectedly. A cancelled meeting, a rare free afternoon. He moved through his home like a ghost, used to the silence, used to things being exactly where he left them. So when he stepped into his kitchen expecting solitude and instead found a young girl hunched over a stack of papers at his island counter, he stopped in his tracks. She didn't notice him at first. He tilted his head, watching. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, eyes darting between lines of text. Her fingers tapped the counter rhythmically, as if typing on an invisible keyboard. Finally, she looked up, startled to see him there. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, jumping to her feet and nearly knocking over her papers. I didn't mean to be in your way." Gregory raised an eyebrow, intrigued more than annoyed. "You're not in my way," he said calmly. His voice was smooth and precise, like a man used to being listened to. "What are you reading?" Emily hesitated, her fingers tightening around the folder. "It's just some programming notes." He stepped closer. "Programming?" "Python," she replied, eyes down. "It's a language for computers." He looked at the black and white printouts. They were filled with loops, conditionals, variables. Simple stuff for someone like him, but advanced for a child her age. "You like computers?" She nodded, cheeks pink. "Yes, sir. Very much." Gregory looked at her again, really looked. Freckles scattered across her nose. Blonde hair pulled into a messy braid. A quiet intensity in her pale blue eyes. "Do you have a computer at home?" Emily shook her head. "No, sir. We can't afford one." I go to the library when I can. But sometimes, I just write things down and try to imagine what they do. Gregory Sinclair was not a sentimental man. He had built his fortune with logic, algorithms, and bold risk. Emotions were distractions. Yet something about this girl, sitting alone in his kitchen reading code off photocopied pages, made a ripple in his carefully constructed world. "What's your name?" he asked. "Emily Carter." "And your mother is?" "Julia Carter. She's cleaning today." He nodded, recognizing the name. Julia had worked for him on and off for years, always quiet, always dependable. He hadn't known she had a daughter. "Well, Miss Emily Carter," he said, walking to a nearby cabinet, "I might have something you'd be interested in." She watched as he rummaged through a drawer, then pulled out an old laptop, scuffed, dusty, and clearly dead. "It hasn't worked in years," he said, placing it on the counter in front of her. "Batteries fried. Screen doesn't turn on. Pretty useless, I'd say." Emily stared at it like it was treasure. "Can I look inside?" Gregory smiled faintly. "If you can fix it, it's yours." Her eyes widened. "Really? Really?" He expected her to hesitate. But instead, she sat down, reached into her backpack, and pulled out a tiny screwdriver set. The kind sold at dollar stores for fixing glasses. He blinked. Without another word, she flipped the laptop over and got to work. Gregory Sinclair leaned against the kitchen counter, his arms folded loosely across his chest, watching the girl with a mixture of amusement and curiosity. Emily's small hands moved carefully over the dusty surface of the old laptop he had placed in front of her. She had not yet touched it, only looked at it like someone discovering a long-lost artifact. "So," he said casually, "you really like computers?" Emily looked up from the scuffed device. There was no hesitation in her answer. "Yes, sir." He tilted his head. "Why?" She took a breath, fidgeting with the sleeve of her sweater. "Because they make sense. They don't judge you. You give them the right instructions, and they do what you ask." Gregory's eyebrows lifted ever so slightly. That was not an answer he'd expected. "And where did you learn all this?" "The library," she said. "And sometimes videos at school, when I can get a computer during lunch. I read a lot." He nodded slowly. "Do you have one at home? A computer?" Emily hesitated, then shook her head. "No, sir. We had one when I was little, but it stopped working. Mama says it's too expensive to fix." Gregory allowed himself a quiet chuckle. There was something refreshingly honest about this girl. No embellishment. No complaining. Just a plain, respectful answer. He looked down at the battered laptop between them, an old prototype from his company, long forgotten in the back of a drawer. He reached over, tapping the lid with one finger. "This old thing's been dead for years. I was going to throw it out, but," he trailed off, looking at her thoughtfully. "Tell you what. If you can fix this, it's yours." Emily's eyes widened, and she sat up straighter. "Really?" He gave a slight smile. "Really. But I wouldn't get your hopes up. The battery's toast, the screen is black, and it's probably got a bad board." Just then, Julia walked into the kitchen, wiping her hands on a cleaning rag. Her eyes immediately darted to her daughter, then to the laptop on the table, then to her employer. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice polite but firm. Gregory gave her a disarming nod. "Just offering Emily a little challenge." Julia glanced down at the laptop. Her brow furrowed. "That's not a toy, sir." "No, it's not," Gregory agreed. "It's broken. Probably unfixable. I told her she could keep it if she manages to make it work again." Julia's face tightened. "Mr. Sinclair, I'm sure you mean well, but Emily isn't." Before she could finish, Emily spoke quietly. "Mom, I want to try." Julia turned to her daughter, surprise flashing in her eyes. "Sweetheart, you don't have to prove anything to anyone." "I know." Emily looked down at the laptop. "But I want to. Just to see if I can." Gregory remained silent, sensing that this was no longer just a game. This moment had shifted. Something about it felt heavier, more meaningful than a broken computer. "Mr. Sinclair," Julia said, her voice a mix of caution and pride, "if she breaks it, you won't hold it against her?" "Of course not," he said easily. "It's already broken." Julia looked at her daughter again. Emily's eyes were focused, hands still at her sides, waiting for permission. After a pause, Julia gave a small nod. "Okay. But be careful, baby." Emily gave the smallest smile, then turned back to the laptop. "I might need a screwdriver," she said softly. Gregory arched a brow. "Planning to open it up?" She nodded. "That's the only way to know what's wrong." With a slight smirk, he stepped over to a drawer, rummaged for a moment, and returned with a basic electronic screwdriver set, one he used for fiddling with watches or small devices on occasion. "Be my guest," he said, placing the kit beside her. Emily looked at it like it was a box of treasure. Without another word, she pulled out the right head, twisted it onto the handle, and flipped the laptop over. Her hands moved slowly, methodically. She located the screws, noted which ones were shorter than the others, placed them on a napkin in a careful pattern. It was clear she'd done this sort of thing before, if not with laptops, then with something else. Gregory didn't speak. Neither did Julia. The room grew quiet except for the soft click of screws being loosened. Every so often, Emily paused to study the layout inside the machine. She didn't rush. She didn't fumble. There was a calmness to her, like someone solving a puzzle she'd seen before but needed to do right this time. Julia stepped back and leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching her daughter with quiet intensity. Gregory, meanwhile, remained at the island, strangely transfixed by the girl. Not because he expected her to succeed, but because she hadn't hesitated. She didn't ask for instructions. She didn't freeze in front of a billionaire. She just started. Emily sat at the kitchen island, feet dangling from the high stool, the old screwdriver resting comfortably in her small hand. The laptop lay open before her like a puzzle, daring her to solve it. She took a deep breath, then exhaled slowly, steadying herself. Around her, the world seemed to quiet. Even the humming refrigerator faded into the background. She began to work. Her fingers moved with surprising confidence for someone her age. One by one, she removed the screws from the back of the laptop, lining them up in perfect rows on a paper napkin. Gregory Sinclair, still standing across the counter, watched with raised eyebrows. He had expected a child playing at being clever, not this level of discipline. She removed the bottom cover and exposed the circuitry within. Her pale blue eyes scanned the interior like a seasoned technician. She didn't touch anything right away. She simply studied, traced connections, noted the dust buildup, tilted her head thoughtfully. Julia stood silently in the background, her arms crossed over her chest, watching her daughter with a mixture of anxiety and awe. She didn't interrupt. She didn't even breathe too loud. She knew this version of Emily, quiet, intensely focused, meant something important was happening. At the 15-minute mark, Emily had fully disassembled the laptop's core components. Battery out. RAM modules removed and reseated. Hard drive checked and cleaned. The fan, clogged with years of lint and neglect, carefully brushed clean using a napkin and the corner of her sleeve. Gregory moved a little closer. Not too close. He didn't want to distract her, but close enough to see the precision of her work. She wasn't guessing. She wasn't fiddling. She was diagnosing. "Where did she learn to do this?" he whispered. Julia didn't take her eyes off Emily. She reads. Watches tutorials when she can. Mostly she just tries. Now Emily began reassembly. Her hands were steady, each motion deliberate. The screws returned to their proper places, in the correct order. The connections snugged back into their ports. The screen was reattached. The battery slid into place with a soft click. She brushed a stray strand of hair behind her ear, her brow still furrowed. At 25 minutes, the laptop looked whole again, at least from the outside. But Emily wasn't finished. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a small flash drive. It was wrapped in masking tape and labeled with tiny handwriting, "Bootloader." She plugged it into the side port and tapped the power button. Nothing. Gregory felt a flicker of smug sympathy. "It was a long shot," he began gently, "you shouldn't." Then the screen flickered. A low whir from the fan broke the silence. The old laptop lit up, the glow spreading slowly across the dark screen like the sunrise. Emily leaned in, watching it with a surgeon's stillness. After a few seconds, white text began to appear on the black background. "Hello, world." Gregory's mouth parted slightly. The words were simple, nothing more than the classic first line every programmer uses to test output. But on that screen, in that moment, it was thunderous. He looked at Emily, who hadn't spoken yet. She simply sat there, blinking at the words, her expression unreadable. "You did it," he said quietly, as if speaking too loudly might break the spell. Emily finally looked up. Her voice was soft. "I wasn't sure if the BIOS would reset. But I think the CMOS battery still had just enough charge." Gregory blinked. You know what a CMOS battery is?" She nodded. "It keeps track of the system clock and basic settings, even when the laptop is off. Sometimes if it's drained, the whole board fails to post. But I jumped the pins." Jumped the pins. Good Lord. For a moment, Gregory didn't know what to say. He had met engineers, grown men with degrees from MIT, who couldn't diagnose a boot issue that fast. Julia stepped forward, hesitant. "Is it really working?" Emily turned the laptop toward her mother, where the little blinking cursor sat patiently next to "Hello, World." She gave a shy smile. "I wrote that in a script and saved it to the boot drive, just to see if it would display." Gregory exhaled. Just to see if it would display. He wasn't sure if he should laugh or cry. His fingers drummed once on the counter, then stopped. For the first time in years, he was genuinely speechless. Emily reached to unplug the flash drive. "I can wipe it later and install an OS if you want. Or, if it's really mine now, I'll do it at home." Gregory raised a hand. "It's yours. No question." She looked at him, surprised. "Thank you." He shook his head, still stunned. "No, Emily. Thank you." Gregory Sinclair sat down slowly on one of the kitchen stools, his eyes still fixed on the glowing screen of the resurrected laptop. The words "Hello, World" blinked steadily, as if quietly celebrating the miracle that had just taken place. Emily Carter, sitting on the other side of the island, looked a little nervous now, twirling the corner of her sleeve between her fingers. After a long pause, Gregory spoke. "Who taught you how to do that?" Emily looked up, unsure if the question was a trap. No one really." "No one." She hesitated, then answered more clearly. "YouTube. And some books from the library." Gregory blinked. "That's it." She nodded. "There's a channel with a guy who fixes old laptops. He talks fast, but if you slow the video down and write things out, you can figure it out. And the library has this one book on computer repair. It's old, though. Talks about floppy disks and stuff." Gregory leaned back slightly, trying to hide his astonishment. He had assumed, wrongly, that perhaps she had taken a class somewhere, or had a tech-savvy relative guiding her. But what she described was pure self-study. Trial and error. Curiosity without mentorship. Hunger without guidance. He stood and walked around the island, gesturing toward the laptop. "Do you mind if I check a few things?" Emily slid the machine over to him. Sure. He opened a terminal window and began typing commands, checking system info, BIOS version, memory usage, hardware configuration. Everything had been reconfigured from scratch. Clean install. No bloatware. No factory partitions. Just a lightweight OS and a simple bootloader. Everything pointed to a complete wipe and reset. You did all this? He asked. Emily nodded. I used a USB with a Linux image. It's faster than Windows on old machines. And easier to fix if something breaks. He glanced sideways at her, almost laughing. Where did you learn how to reflash BIOS? I didn't, she said quickly. I just read about it. I watched a video once where a guy used a paperclip to reset a BIOS password. I didn't have to do that, though. This one wasn't locked. And you checked the RAM? I reseated it. One of the modules wasn't clicked in all the way. I saw that once in a forum. They said loose RAM can cause power-on failure. Gregory couldn't help himself. He laughed, quietly but sincerely. It wasn't a laugh of mockery. It was the laugh of someone truly impressed. This girl, sitting in his designer kitchen, had just done what junior techs at his own company would need a checklist to attempt. How old are you again? He asked, looking at her fully. Emily straightened in her seat. 11, sir. 11. He repeated the number as if trying to make it fit with what he had just witnessed. Emily looked down. I know I'm not supposed to mess with things that don't belong to me. I like figuring stuff out. Gregory closed the laptop gently, then pushed it back toward her. Emily, you didn't mess with anything. You fixed something that I thought was junk. She smiled faintly, but there was still hesitation in her eyes, like she was waiting for the grown-up mood to shift, for him to suddenly remember she wasn't supposed to be here, using his tools, touching his property. Instead, Gregory said, Can I ask you a question? Okay. Why do you like computers so much? Emily thought for a moment. Because they make sense. When something goes wrong, there's usually a reason. If you're patient, you can find it. You can fix it. He nodded slowly. That answer struck him deeper than he expected. There was something remarkably adult in the way she said it. Not just intelligent, resilient. And what do you want to be when you grow up? Emily gave a shy shrug. I don't know. I mean, maybe a programmer. Or someone who builds stuff. But I don't know if people like me get to do that. Gregory narrowed his eyes slightly. People like you? She hesitated. You know, people who don't have computers at home. Or whose moms clean houses. Gregory's heart gave a subtle, almost uncomfortable shift. He stared at her for a long moment, then said gently, You'd be surprised what kind of people get to build the future. Emily's eyes flickered with a mix of hope and uncertainty. He stood, smoothing his jacket. Well, Miss Carter, I think you've earned that laptop. And probably a lot more than that. Thank you, she said softly. Then she paused. Really? Thank you. He looked down at her and smiled. You're welcome. But in the back of his mind, 100 thoughts were already spinning, about talent, about wasted potential, about how easily brilliance could go unnoticed if someone didn't stop and ask the right question. The following Monday, Gregory Sinclair made an unusual call to his downtown tech office. I need you to clear the small lab, he told his executive assistant. No, not for a client. I'm bringing someone in. Just make sure the team's around. I want them to see something. That afternoon, he arrived not with a fellow investor or high-ranking consultant, but with a small girl in a slightly oversized coat, holding an old laptop like it was a prize from a treasure hunt. Emily Carter looked out the window of the black sedan as they pulled up to the Sinclair Innovations headquarters. The towering glass building shimmered in the afternoon light like a vertical lake. This is where you work? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Among other places, Gregory said with a smile. "Come on. There's something I want to show you." The receptionist greeted Gregory by name but blinked in surprise when her eyes landed on Emily. Gregory didn't explain. He simply placed a hand gently on the girl's shoulder and guided her toward the elevators. When they reached the tech development floor, the air shifted. Here, in the heart of the company, engineers in jeans and hoodies clustered around workbenches and glowing screens. A few lifted their heads when Gregory walked in, and even more when they noticed the young girl beside him. "This is Emily Carter," Gregory announced casually, waving them over. "She rebuilt one of our oldest prototype laptops over the weekend. On her own." The engineers glanced at each other. Some looked politely curious. Others clearly doubted what they'd heard. "She's 11, Gregory added, a bit of pride edging into his voice. That turned a few more heads. "Seriously?" One of the younger coders muttered under his breath. Emily shifted nervously beside Gregory, gripping the laptop tighter. Gregory leaned down and whispered, "Don't worry. Just watch and listen. You don't have to prove anything." He led her to a workstation at the far end of the lab. On the screen was a real-time monitoring dashboard showing data flow between internal servers. Gregory gestured to a cluster of developers gathered around it. "Right now," he explained, "they're testing optimization scripts for load balancing across our newer server nodes. They've been trying to shave down latency without compromising memory allocation." Emily blinked slowly, absorbing every word. The engineers kept their eyes on her, some still skeptical, some amused. "What do you think?" Gregory asked her quietly. Emily bit her lip, watching the log stream scroll by on the monitor. "That loop," she said suddenly, pointing at the screen. "That's a while loop nested inside a fetch call, right?" The team lead looked at her, surprised. "Yes. It's checking every user object across all nodes, then pushing updates back if the version number changed?" "Correct." Emily stepped a little closer. "But why not cache the version check in memory? If it's unchanged, you're doing unnecessary writes." The room went quiet. "Show me what you mean," one of the engineers said cautiously, sliding the keyboard toward her. Emily hesitated. Gregory gave her a nod. She stepped forward, carefully placed her fingers on the keys, and typed out a conditional block, a short insertion that would locally store the last version check and compare it before initiating the update loop. Then she rewrote the existing line using that variable. She hit enter. The screen flashed once, then resumed scrolling, but this time, with a visibly reduced call frequency. One of the coders let out a low whistle. "Whoa." Another checked the runtime metrics. "That's a measurable drop. Almost 11% fewer write operations." The lead engineer leaned in. "Did you just optimize that in under a minute?" Emily looked down. "Sorry. Was that okay?" There was a pause, then a laugh from the back of the room. "More than okay," someone said. A bald man in his 40s, wearing a hoodie that read "Code like you mean it," stepped forward, arms crossed and a grin spreading on his face. "This kid doesn't need to learn how to program," he said, shaking his head. "She already thinks like a machine." The others murmured in agreement. One of them turned to Gregory. "Where did you find her?" Gregory gave a small smile. "Let's just say I handed her a broken laptop, and she gave me back a working miracle." Emily didn't fully understand what they were all so impressed about. It had seemed obvious to her, a simple way to cut redundant steps. But the way the engineers looked at her now, the way their skepticism had shifted to curiosity and respect, it made her cheeks warm. Gregory leaned down beside her. "You belong here more than you know." Emily looked around the room, at the blinking servers, the floating bits of code, the glowing screens, and for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she did. Gregory Sinclair stood in the back of the lab, away from the glowing monitors and murmuring engineers. He watched Emily from a distance, his hands clasped behind his back. The girl didn't know he was observing her, didn't see the way his expression had shifted, the subtle tightness in his jaw, the sudden stillness in his stance. She was hunched slightly over the keyboard, eyes narrowed, completely absorbed. Her blonde hair had fallen across her forehead in soft waves, and she kept brushing it back with the back of her wrist, never lifting her gaze. Her fingers tapped gently but decisively, confident, precise. Focused. It hit him like a punch to the chest. For a brief, flickering moment, Gregory saw someone else in her place. A girl with a similar build. A similar shade of hair. A similar intensity in her expression when she was lost in thought. She too used to sit like that, tilted forward, her face lit only by the glow of a screen or a desk lamp. She too had loved code. Not for competition. Not for glory. But because it made the world make sense. Her name was Lily. Gregory turned away from the lab before the memories could drown him. Without a word to anyone, he walked briskly down the hall, past the reception area, into his corner office overlooking the city. The door closed behind him with a soft click. He didn't sit. Instead, he crossed to the far side of the room where a heavy oak filing cabinet stood beneath a bookshelf filled with forgotten binders and old contracts. He reached into the second drawer, past rows of unopened mail, outdated reports, and unfiled tax summaries, and pulled out a small velvet-lined box. Inside was a photograph. Time had dulled its edges, but the image was still sharp in his mind. Lily sat at the dining table in their old house in Boston, surrounded by scattered pages and a beat-up laptop with a missing key. She had been 10 years old then. Her cheeks were round with youth, her smile crooked and curious. Her eyes, those bright, endlessly inquisitive eyes, had been glued to the screen. He used to call her his little engineer. But her heart had betrayed her. A rare congenital condition, discovered too late. Surgery after surgery. Hope rising, then crashing. Until one day, there was no more hope left to crash. She had passed away at the age of 10, leaving behind a room filled with robotics kits, sketchpads covered in flowcharts, and a grief that no amount of logic could dismantle. Gregory sat down slowly at his desk, the photograph trembling slightly in his hand. He hadn't looked at it in over 2 years. Not because he forgot, but because remembering hurt too much. The kind of hurt that no amount of work, money, or silence could numb. He had built empires, negotiated billion-dollar deals, advised presidents, but nothing could undo the moment they wheeled her away for the final time. And now, here was this girl. This stranger. Emily Carter. 11 years old, full of questions, full of quiet brilliance. Holding a broken machine like it was something precious, refusing to give up, smiling only when she had solved something no one expected her to. Gregory placed Lily's photo on the desk and pulled his phone from his pocket. He scrolled quickly to the camera app, pulled up the photo he had taken earlier that afternoon. Emily standing at the workstation, her head tilted in concentration, one hand curled under her chin, the other hovering above the keyboard. He placed the two images side by side. And stared. Same posture. Same furrowed brow. Same spark in the eyes, somewhere between wonder and determination. His breath caught. It wasn't just resemblance. It wasn't just coincidence. It was a feeling. A presence. Something inexplicable. A thread of memory, tugging gently at the corners of his chest. He leaned back, eyes still locked on the pictures. The silence of the office wrapped around him like a blanket. Outside the window, the city pulsed and shimmered, unaware of the war being waged inside his heart. He hadn't expected this. Hadn't asked for it. But somehow this girl, this child of a housekeeper with secondhand books and no computer at home, had reopened a door he had closed long ago. Gregory reached out and gently touched the edge of Lily's photo, then turned to the new one of Emily. Different girls. Different stories. But something in that concentration, in that fire behind their eyes, whispered the same truth. Some lights never really go out. They just wait for a new way to shine. The office had grown dark. Gregory hadn't realized how much time had passed until the lights in the hallway dimmed automatically for evening mode. Outside the window, the city skyline had shifted from golden haze to dusky blue. He leaned back in his chair, still staring at the two photos side by side. Lily, frozen in time, and Emily, alive in a moment he could not stop thinking about. He rubbed a hand over his jaw, then stood, slowly sliding the velvet-lined box back into the drawer. There was a tightness in his chest he hadn't felt in years, and it wasn't grief, not quite. It was something quieter, older. The sensation of a door creaking open inside him, revealing a room he thought he had locked for good. He left the office and made his way down to the lobby. The building was quiet now. Most of the engineers had gone home. The front desk attendant looked up in surprise when Gregory approached, not because he was leaving, but because he paused and asked, "Has Julia Carter left yet?" She checked her screen. "No, sir. She's still in the lounge with her daughter." Gregory nodded once. "Thank you." He found them in a small break room near the elevators. Julia was seated on one of the couches, sipping coffee from a paper cup, while Emily curled up next to her with a laptop resting on her knees. The girl was absorbed again, typing something with her usual silent focus. She didn't notice Gregory enter. Julia did. She stood quickly, setting the coffee aside. "Mr. Sinclair, sorry, we didn't realize you were still here." Gregory raised a hand gently. "No need to apologize. I was just thinking." Julia gave a small nod. She looked tired but proud, like a mother who had watched her child quietly astonish the world and was still catching her breath. He motioned toward the hallway. "May I speak with you? Just for a minute." She hesitated, glancing at Emily, then followed him a few steps out into the corridor. They stood beside the tall windows that overlooked the city. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Gregory asked it. "Has Emily ever asked about her father?" Julia's breath caught almost imperceptibly. She looked down, then out at the skyline, her hands tightening around each other. "Once or twice," she said softly. "But not in a long time." Gregory studied her profile, the way her mouth pressed into a line that held more than just restraint. "Does she know anything?" Julia shook her head. "She's never met him. Doesn't even know his name." He waited for more. None came. "She's curious sometimes," Julia added after a moment. "But she doesn't push. I think she learned early on that some questions don't get answers." Gregory nodded slowly, the weight of her words pressing down on him in a way he couldn't explain. Not yet. Not fully. He wasn't sure why he had asked. The question had just risen. As naturally and uncomfortably as breath after holding it too long. "She's remarkable," he said after a moment. "I hope you know that." Julia smiled faintly. "I do. I've worked with people who've gone through years of training, formal degrees, labs, mentors. And still, they don't see what she sees." "I know." Gregory turned to face her more directly. "She has something rare. Not just the skill. The way she sees problems. The way she works through them without fear. That's not teachable." Julia looked down again. "She taught herself everything she knows. I just tried to stay out of her way." Gregory chuckled softly. Maybe that was the smartest thing any of us could have done. For a long moment, the two of them stood in silence, the buzz of distant city traffic barely reaching the quiet glass tower they occupied. Then Julia said, almost as an afterthought, "Sometimes I wonder if she got it from him." Gregory didn't ask who him was. She didn't offer more. And yet the question he'd come down to ask, the one he had held for so long, longer than he realized, lingered unanswered between them. But something inside him had shifted. A sense of recognition. Of possibility. Of doors left ajar that he never knew were waiting for him to open. He nodded once. "Thank you for letting her come here today." Julia looked at him, and there was something complicated in her eyes. Gratitude, maybe. Or fear. Or something much older than either. She needed this, she said. More than you know. Gregory gave a quiet smile. I think I needed it too. He looked back through the glass toward the lounge. Emily was still typing, her eyes locked on the screen, her lips moving silently as she tested code that probably only made sense in her head. Gregory felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. He didn't have a word for it. But it felt like the beginning of something. A week had passed since Emily's quiet triumph at Sinclair Innovations. 7 days filled with questions from classmates, late-night scribbling in her notebook, and long talks with her mother about things neither of them fully understood yet. Julia hadn't said much about Mr. Sinclair since that day in the tower, and Emily didn't push. But something had changed. There was a soft urgency in her mother's eyes now, like she was trying to prepare for something she couldn't name. Then, on Friday afternoon, a package arrived. It was left at their apartment door in a matte black box with no shipping label, no return address, just Emily's name written in careful block letters across the top in silver ink. She hesitated before opening it, glancing at her mom. Julia was folding laundry at the kitchen table, but her hands paused when she saw the box. Did you order something? Emily asked. Julia shook her head slowly. No, baby. I didn't. Emily sat on the floor, legs crossed, and carefully lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in a soft gray microfiber cloth, was a laptop. But not just any laptop. It was sleek, thin, impossibly lightweight. The casing was smooth brushed metal, no stickers, no branding, no manufacturer marks. Just, pure, minimal, mysterious. Emily's fingers hovered over it, breath caught in her chest. She looked back at her mom, who had now walked over and knelt beside her. Should I turn it on? Emily asked quietly. Julia nodded once. Go ahead. Emily opened the lid slowly. The screen blinked to life. No startup sound, no splash screen, no operating system logo. Just a black background and a few words in soft white type, centered on the screen. Code your future, Emily. Emily's breath hitched. Her heart thudded once, then again. Her eyes moved to the smaller line of text just beneath. From someone who finally sees you. She didn't move. For a full minute, she just stared. Her mother's hand found her shoulder. Neither of them spoke. It wasn't flashy. There were no balloons, no confetti, no praise broadcast to the world. Just a message. Quiet. Private. Powerful. Someone had seen her. Someone had given her more than a machine. It was permission. It was belief. It was a beginning. She looked at the keyboard. No scratches, no smudges. The keys were smooth and firm under her fingers. She tested a few, silent, perfect resistance. When she tapped enter, the message disappeared, and a clean development environment opened on the screen. No desktop icons. No apps. Just a terminal window and a blinking cursor waiting. Who sent this? She whispered. Julia didn't answer right away. But something in her face had softened. I think you know. Emily bit her bottom lip. Do you think it was Mr. Sinclair? Julia exhaled. He's the only person I've ever seen look at you like that. Emily didn't ask what she meant. Somehow, she already understood. Later that evening, while her mom made dinner, Emily sat at the tiny kitchen table and explored the machine. It had everything she'd ever dreamed of, a full Python suite, JavaScript tools, circuit simulation apps, and even an offline library of programming textbooks built into the storage. Whoever sent it had built it for her. There was no Wi-Fi splash page, no software bloat, no system updates screaming for attention. Just a machine designed to do, quietly, efficiently, exactly what she needed. The trackpad was smooth and precise. The screen had perfect resolution. But what struck Emily most was what wasn't there. No distractions. No games. No brand shouting across the backlit logo. It didn't need to prove itself. And for the first time, neither did she. Later that night, before bed, Emily sat cross-legged on the floor and opened a new file. She typed the words slowly, thoughtfully. Hashtag my first line of code on my real machine. Print, I'm not just fixing things anymore. I'm building them. She pressed enter. The terminal replied. I'm not just fixing things anymore. I'm building them. She smiled. Outside the window, the city lights shimmered. Inside their small apartment, a girl who had always seen computers as puzzles now saw them as promises. She didn't know exactly where this would take her. But now, for the first time, she had the tools. And more importantly, she had the belief. The public library smelled faintly of old books and hand sanitizer, a blend of comfort and order. It was a modest building tucked between a laundromat and a pizza shop on a quiet street. But for Emily Carter, it might as well have been a cathedral. She stood nervously in the multipurpose room at the back of the library, where folding tables had been arranged into a loose U-shape. A dozen kids, ranging from age 7 to 12, sat in metal chairs, fidgeting with excitement. In front of each child was an old laptop, most of them donated, some with cracked keys or scuffed screens, but all of them functioning. Emily had made sure of that. She looked down at her clipboard, checking the notes she'd handwritten the night before. Her lesson plan was simple: teach the basics of taking apart a laptop safely, explain how each component worked, and if they had time, walk the kids through writing their very first click-to-win game in Scratch. It wasn't a formal class. She wasn't a teacher. Just an 11-year-old girl with a strange new confidence and a heart full of purpose. At the front of the room, the library's director, Mrs. Alcott, cleared her throat and smiled warmly at the group. "Okay, everyone," she said. "Let's give a big welcome to the founder of our very first Technology Discovery Club, Miss Emily Carter." The kids clapped enthusiastically. Emily flushed pink, offered a small wave, and stepped forward. "Hi," she said shyly. "I'm Emily. And today we're going to open up these laptops and look inside, not to break them, but to understand them." One boy raised his hand. "Can we put them back together after?" Emily grinned. "That's the point." The room filled with giggles. From the back of the room, unnoticed by all, a tall man in a charcoal overcoat slipped quietly into a chair near the exit. He kept his head low, hands resting on his knees. His name was Gregory Sinclair, and his presence here wasn't scheduled, announced, or expected. He didn't want to be seen. He just wanted to see. Emily didn't know he was there. Her focus was on the students now. She passed around tiny screwdrivers and explained how to ground themselves before touching sensitive parts. Her tone was calm but firm, like someone much older, someone who had done this 100 times. One by one, the kids began opening their machines. Some gasped when they saw the maze of wires and chips inside. Emily moved from table to table, pointing out parts. "That's the CPU, it's like the brain, and see this? That's your RAM. It helps the computer think fast." Gregory sat still, watching her move between children like a quiet spark of light. Her voice was steady. Her explanations clear. And when one girl began to cry because a screw rolled under the table, Emily simply got on her knees, found it, and said with a smile, "Happens to everyone. You're doing great." Gregory's hand trembled slightly in his lap. She reminded him of someone. Not just Lily. That was part of it, of course, the posture, the eyes, but more than that, it was the sense of quiet command. Emily didn't need to shout to lead. She just invited others into what she loved. And they followed. The second half of the session moved into coding. Emily projected her screen onto a small whiteboard using an ancient projector the library tech had revived. The resolution was fuzzy, but the excitement in the room was crystal clear. As she walked the group through building a tiny game where a cat caught falling stars, the room erupted with laughter. "Can I make the stars explode?" one boy asked. "Sure," Emily said. But you'll need to learn how to animate a sprite. What's a sprite? A picture that moves, she answered. Like a character in a game. I'll show you. In the back, Gregory's lips curled into something rare, a smile not of pride but of relief. She wasn't just talented. She was generous with it. That was something no tutor, no school, no investment could manufacture. As the session wrapped up and the kids packed away their tools, several stayed behind to ask questions. Emily promised she'd be back next Friday with a lesson on building your own website using a free hosting tool. Gregory rose quietly, careful not to draw attention. He paused at the door and looked back one last time. Emily was laughing now, talking with a girl who wanted to change the color of her game background. She nodded, crouched down beside the laptop, and guided the girl through the steps. Gregory slipped out into the hallway and pressed his hand briefly to the wall. His fingers were still trembling. Not from sadness. From something else. Something like awe. The night was quiet, too quiet for a man used to noise. Gregory Sinclair sat alone in his private study, lights dimmed low, a half-full glass of scotch untouched on the table beside him. The room was wrapped in stillness, broken only by the faint ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway and the low hum of the city beyond his windows. In front of him sat an old laptop. It was the same one he'd handed to a girl named Emily Carter weeks ago, fully expecting it to end up in the recycling bin. He had kept it, strangely. Part sentiment, part curiosity. And now, for reasons he couldn't name, he had brought it out again. He brushed a finger over the surface. The casing was still scratched, the hinge slightly loose. It had been patched back together by the hands of a child, and yet, it booted up faster than some of the company-issued machines at his office. The screen lit up, a familiar login page blinking at him. He entered the simple password Emily had set when she returned it, "Hello World." The desktop was mostly empty, save for a single folder in the top right corner. It was labeled, "For You" in all caps. Gregory blinked, his heart skipping unexpectedly. He double-clicked. Inside the folder was one video file. No title, no date. Just a MP4 file with a name he couldn't quite interpret, em_code_heart. He clicked it. The screen flickered, then filled with the face of a young girl. Emily sat in what looked like a kitchen, her curly blonde hair slightly mussed, a piece of toast half-eaten on the plate beside her. She looked nervous. Her eyes darted left, then right, and then she gave the camera a sheepish smile. "Hi," she said, then giggled. "I'm not really good at this video stuff, but I wanted to say something." Gregory leaned in. "I don't know who you really are," she continued, her voice gentle. "I mean, I know your name. I know you're important. But I don't know you. Not the way most people do." She paused, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "But that day in the kitchen, when you gave me that broken laptop, it was the first time someone looked at me like I was more than just a kid." She looked away for a second, then back. "I know it was probably just a joke. I mean, it was broken. And I know you didn't expect me to fix it. But I tried. Because no one's ever given me something like that before. Not something that said, 'Hey, maybe you can do this.'" Gregory swallowed hard. Emily took a breath. "I don't have a dad. And I don't really have anyone telling me I can be anything. It's always just been me and Mom, trying to get through the day. So when you gave me that laptop, I didn't just see a machine. I saw a chance." She smiled again, softer this time. "You gave me something I didn't even know I needed. A beat. Belief." Gregory felt it before he realized it, his eyes welling, throat tightening, breath catching in the middle of his chest like it didn't know how to move forward. The girl on the screen continued. "So I wanted to give you something back. Just this message. To say thank you. Even if you never see it. Even if you forget me. I won't forget that moment. Because it made me feel seen. And that changes everything." Emily gave one last look to the camera. Thank you for seeing me. The video faded to black. Gregory stared at the screen, his face bathed in the pale glow of the laptop. And then, as the silence returned, something inside him broke loose. Tears began to fall. Not the kind of tears that came from pain, or even sadness, but the kind that came when something long frozen inside began to thaw, when a corner of the heart, untouched for years, finally remembered how to feel. For the first time in 6 years, Gregory Sinclair wept. Not because he was broken, but because, somehow, he was being repaired. And it all started with a girl, a screwdriver, and a line of code that had traveled, quietly miraculously, back to his heart. Where are you watching from today? Drop the name of your city or country in the comments. We love seeing how this warm and inspiring community stretches across the world. If you believe that an old laptop can unlock an entire future, maybe something you're holding onto today is just waiting to be given too. Tap that like button, subscribe to our channel, and let's keep sharing the simple, quiet moments that can change someone's life forever.